So now we're going to speak about NI and continuance of function definitions. And we'll be going through multiple systems, popular ones, and as well as reading our definition of NI towards the end. But we always have to start with Carl Jung, since these are not only his functions, but any existence in relation to functions is from how he defines each function. So any deviation used in other systems that go far beyond what the function is, by definition, is not actually verifying definitions for what they are. No different from looking up a word in a dictionary. You need a foundation. And when you have that foundation, then you build. You can't just build off of no foundation. Otherwise, we're not speaking about the same exact thing. Therefore, why are you using the same terminology? Something to think about. So we have to start about with Carl Jung and psychological types. He says, introverted intuition, NI, is a cognitive function that perceives possibilities and meaning in the world, focusing on inner patterns and insights rather than external details. Right, because it's not sensation. NI is considered a perceiving function and is classified by a preference for patterns, symbols, and archetypes. NI users tend to have a strong sense of knowing without needing to understand the process, often relying on intuition and a sense of vision. So, right there, this speaks to almost knowing without proof, or knowing without details to verify, because they lack details. The reason why they come off more vague, right, in how they express things. But because it's a perception function and dominant, they tend to have a lot of insights and views and try to merge everything together, that it becomes more symbolic in its delivery. They see archetypes as something that is strong. Strong NI in general sees archetypes, but NI users sees it even more, because what they tend to do is add meaning to those objects that aren't always seen. Even for them, what they mean is hard to grasp. It's very delicate intuition when it comes about, or when you compare it to something that is more tangible as sensation. It is in the intangible, yet there's a time element that's there. And I think overall it sets the standard to what NI actually is by Carl Jung. MBTI. And it says, NI, introverted intuition, is a cognitive function that focuses on understanding the underlying meanings, patterns, and future possibilities within one's own inner world. True. It's the way individuals with NI process information and make decisions. Okay, that sounds weird. Often relying on a sense of knowing or insight rather than logical analysis. Okay, now that's very important, right? Let's say you have NI and TI working together. There's two types that do this very well. In IDT, we call that ideation, right? It doesn't even matter attitude. Intuition and thinking is ideation. Now, if it's an NI lead, although they use their TI more so as we call an IDT checkpoints for the theme, right? What is the theme? The theme is more about the vision, the view, how they see things, right? The world view. They become narrators of that world, and their JI, TI in this situation acts as a checkpoint to verify points along the road, along that intuitive timeline that they create for themselves. Logic in and of itself isn't the focus. They're not highlighting or deducting in that way. So although they have a deductive reasoning to go along with the process within time, it's about the insight, the view. Where am I? Often relying on a sense of knowing and insight rather than logical analysis. NI users are typically drawn to abstract ideas, philosophical questions, and long term goals. A lot of that is true. Objective personality, OPS. NI, or introverted intuition, is defined as a function that focuses on understanding patterns and abstract concepts, particularly those that are universal and timeless. Okay. It helps individuals see the bigger picture, identify potential, and create long-term plans based on these abstract understandings. NI is also seen as the observer function for those who are observer types. So this is very specific towards the end here, with OPS being an observer type. Is more related to how they constructed within their theory or system, rather. And an observer type, I am guessing, because I don't know that system well, is maybe perceiver types to a degree. So far, so good. Socionics. NI is generally associated with the ability to recognize the unfolding of processes over time. So how I interpret that unfolding of processes over time makes a lot of sense to me, because it's kind of like the reason why it's unfolding is because it's not something that you can actually see, but it is something that is internal, which has to be highlighted, right? People forget, or systems forget, how important it is to remind people why it's introverted and not extroverted, which is one of the foundational markers to typology made by Carl Jung. Introverted, right? Why is it unfolding? It's unfolding for themselves, but not necessarily for you if it's dominant in this way. You don't have to see it for it to exist, in other words, but they know. And that's where the knowing comes from in those definitions, right? Where am I? Okay. How one event leads to another, have visions of the past and future, developmental imagery, and see intangible hints of relationships between processes or objects. I agree. Everything here makes a lot of sense, right? It's intangible hints. It says hints because it's not something that you can actually see. That's a good play on words there. Imagery, absolutely. Again, it is intuitive. The relationship between processes or objects and the meaning behind those things, absolutely. You put all that together, it's a pretty good, decent definition of NI 100%. Types that value NI always like to have in mind a specific plan for how their life will develop in the future. That is a great way to explain that. It goes back to the introvert. It goes back to the subject when they say their life and how it develops into the future is bringing it back to subject over the object. That's what matters. They have little time for the concept of living in the moment or making the best of the present. They generally engage in pure leisure activities only for short periods of time. And even then, their leisure activities generally involves a psychologically demanding or competitive aspect. Yeah, I agree with that. I think that that's pretty solid. They're highlighting the lack of engagement. They're highlighting a time element and how long it takes for them to engage, or before they actually become a little bit more uncomfortable. And yeah, I just think it's a pretty solid definition of NI. Okay, so now we're going to read NI and IDT. In detached constraint narrators, NI serves as the dominant pillar function based on a perceptual lens that projects conceptually in the abstract time. NI in the pillar position helps shapes their intangible perceptive views while being continuously linked to an in-service function of TI or FI, oscillating between ideational dreaming within a major arc. NI pillar types initially explore the intangible elements that are more personal to their reflective views, that formulate potential insights. NI pillars have a preference for identifying patterns that are vaguely expressed due to the lack of sensation in their major arc. NI tends to narrow down internally, meaning subject in its orientation. They often tend to be drawn most to abstract ideas in search of philosophical meaning, creating checkpoints in time with the use of TI or FI. Unlike SI, NI is less grounded in search of what could be, yet often focusing on the bigger picture over tangible details. NI in this position often carries an insecurity around some form of performance anxiety, which is why plans of engagements are often referred to for themselves. As for the opposing auxiliary function of FE or TE, it is used cautiously. It is more arranged protocols that are reduced, highlighting their visions that are expressed in more simplified ways. Later.